Good morning from the East Coast of the United States. My name is Mark Stepanian and I'm our Chief Experience Officer at CAVU Designwerks. Today I have the pleasure of being joined virtually by Terry Sanderson. Terry is the new Product Development Officer at DreamCraft Attractions, our sister company, and Terry is located on the west coast of Canada in Victoria, British Columbia.
Hi Mark, pleasure to be here.
Today, we want to spend some time with you talking about something that both Terry and I are very passionate about and an area that we work in every single day of our lives, and that's interactive experiences, especially interactive attractions in the entertainment and amusement space. We want to first start off by looking at the definition of interactive attractions and exploring on how we can redefine that. Next, we want to think about how can we use this new definition of interactivity as a tool to create deeper, more emotional storytelling experiences. And lastly, we want to look at what new and existing technology exists that we can leverage to further deepen those emotional connections. All of us are imaginative storytellers, and we take a lot of pride and we spend a lot of time and energy telling these creative stories. And so further exploring how we can use interactivity as a tool to create deeper, more emotional stories is really key. We're really excited and we can't wait to get started. Historically, attractions that are defined as interactive in the amusement industry are those like shooting style dark rides. Basically, guests are given some sort of input device, whether it's a laser blaster or a gun or a disc thrower, and guests aim at targets, usually get some score, also maybe sometimes trigger different animatronics, different animatronic effects. And while those experiences are really fun, they're really one way from the guest outward. The story doesn't really meaningfully react. It's not driving, the guests are not driving the story, they're merely playing along with the story. Meaningful reaction is missing. This broken connection between the story and our guests creates issues with creating that emotional connection. Of course, the attractions are fun, no doubt about that, but guests don't get off feeling connected to the story and brand. So as a first step, we want to drill down and really understand what is the pathway to get from where we are now to truly interactive emotional stories. As a start, we can look at the actual definition of interactivity. Interactivity is defined as the process of two people or things working together and influencing each other. The important part here is two people or things influencing each other. As a starting point, we can drill down into influencing. How do we allow people on our attractions or our rides, how do we allow them to be able to influence each other or influence things in our stories? To us, that's agency. That's the ability to make things happen. Like JFK said, things don't just happen on their own. We have to make things happen. And so to us, influencing means giving guests agency. Formally, agency is defined as the independent capability or ability to act on one's own will, formed through one's experiences. The important parts here again are the ability to act. So the first layer then, along the path to immersive, interactive, emotional attractions is giving guests some sense of agency, giving guests some ability to control the story that they're in. This brings up a whole range of questions. What things should guests have agency over? Do we give guests free range over the entire experience, or do we have an experience with guardrails? How do guests use that agency? Do they have a steering wheel? Are they pulling levers? How do we tell guests they have agency? What about group decision making? How do we give guests agency but still tell a convincing and compelling story every single time that attraction takes place? To answer these questions, I'd like to bring in Terry and chat with him through his experience and what he has learned over the past few years as he's developed experiential and immersive and interactive attractions, but also using his background as video game designers who have been doing this exact thing for decades. Terry, starting off, rides have traditionally been pretty passive experiences. You sit down, you buckle in, and then you move through the story, and the story is really told to you. While sure, there's all these things happening around you, your ability to influence the story is basically zero. We haven't seen many attractions where guests, either individually or as a group, affect the experience. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's right. Dark rides, iron rides, flying theaters, they've all been these passive experiences, as you note, where the outcome is very repeatable and very consistent. These are a lot of fun, to be sure. There's nothing wrong with these rides at all, and they're built that way on purpose, so you know what to expect when you come back. It's something that you've enjoyed before, you know you're going to enjoy again. So there's a logic to it, and there's a reason for it.
Yeah, exactly. But adding to that sense of control, being able to affect the outcomes adds a whole new layer to the experience, right?
Yeah, very much so, of course. There's always going to be a small amount of people that will only ever want a passive ride. They may not want to be interactive, so we need to account for them as we design these new experiences going forward. And of course, the more people you add to a ride vehicle, the more complicated it gets in terms of both group dynamics, how to keep track of them, how to understand what they're doing, and how to react to them. So there's a lot of design decisions and input requirements that require a lot more thought and planning for this type of stuff than a typical physics or linear media-based ride system. It's not easy, but the elevation of the experience is very much worth the effort.
And what about group decision making? This has been an area that's been a real challenge for our industry because sure, there are some new emerging attractions which just have single riders, so each person has the ability to make their own decisions. But what about attractions where 4 or 6 or even 12 people are in one single ride vehicle? Have you guys worked on any solutions that deals with that group decision making?
Yeah. Group decision making has really not been a decision at all previously because the group's been told what to do by taking them there. What we can do these days, though, is we can understand intent in a lot of cases through gesture, through voice, through emotion, through various input mechanisms. We can understand what the majority of the group is kind of looking at or get a sense of direction in terms of what the group would like to do, and then guide the experience in that direction so it feels much more organic as opposed to just a straight up linear experience.
So when it comes to agency, by far the most innovative use of new technology, especially in media-based attractions, is the introduction of a game engine or game engine technology to deliver that real-time content. Terry, like I said before, you've been developing video games for 30 years. So you've really dealt with this real-time gaming engine for years. You've solved many of the problems we're looking to solve in our industry, such as how do you tell convincing stories without having all of these arrows and flashing lights that says go here. Video games have solved that problem and have been really refining it for years. So can you walk us through that real-time technology in general and some potential applications in our industry?
By using game engines, we're able to seamlessly react to guest inputs, reactions, decisions, and alter the content in real time to make each experience different from the last and providing incentive as well for repeat rides. The game world, of course, has many years of experience honing interactive designs to engage users with highly interactive and reactionary worlds and environments. So we can now funnel those learnings around user interactions into these amazing 4 to 5 minute experiences and attractions that completely engage and immerse guests in these worlds where they now have some control over their own experience, much like in a video game. We're sort of using the same underlying technology. This is very difficult and even impossible with traditional passive media, whereas game engine technology was developed specifically to both render at very high frame rates and react to user inputs. So this is the key underlying technology that allows us to redefine interactivity for theme parks and attractions.
Yeah, exactly. And while agency is great because it allows for rewritability or replayability, in that guests can re-experience the attraction many times, and because we've given guests the ability to influence the story changes and it's unique every time they ride it. However, there's some drawbacks. Some operators may be concerned about throughput or telling a consistent story. Is there a way to meet those requirements, whether it's a throughput or a story arc that needs to be told every time while allowing some agency?
Yeah, absolutely. Operators do have throughput requirements, of course. They need to know what the hourly, daily cadence of ridership is, as you note. They need that to be fairly consistent or knowable anyway. So you can't just have guests, stopping in the middle of an experience, looking around, going off somewhere else and using the controls to do that. You do need a fallback. So we're able to, underneath the hood, using the system, provide the sense of agency within a confined area of time or space, such that riders can get a feeling that they are guiding themselves, they are moving through the experience and moving through the narrative, propel them that way so they are incentivized to do that. If they do decide to either offer no input or they want a passive ride, that can happen as well, because underneath the hood we are putting you sort of on rails, and we're giving you the same length of time experience whether you provide input or not, giving you the same narrative elements. So using the system, we can kind of autopilot you through the experience as a passenger if that's their choice. So no guest will really go without experiencing the intent of the ride. Most guests, of course, they're going to choose to engage with it, and the more interactivity we introduce to it, the better, the deeper the believability, and of course the larger the emotional response, because they have that sense of control, that sense of agency, that sense of purpose.
Really good points, Terry. And so then on a final note, game engines are getting really advanced. The ability to render near photorealistic content, similar to what you would see from an actual real-life videographer. That's allowing more convincing, more compelling content, even surpassing the uncanny valley in many instances. We should see those updates and upgrades coming to our industry, right? Those upgrades would come in the form of highly sophisticated environments and highly sophisticated animations and characters emerging in the attractions industry. These improvements could allow for even better, more intimate interactions. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, exactly, that's right. Using these game engine technologies across virtual reality, augmented reality, projection mapping, it's all going to radically change and alter the landscape in the very near future in terms of what guests are experiencing. Unreal Engine, Unity Engine, they're in this sort of battle royal right now in terms of who can outdo each other. In sense in particular, like you're talking about, what's the most photoreal and most amazing visual effects that we can build into these systems and these engines. They're really continuing to push the boundaries and pushing each other as well. So game engines now, they're able to track and respond and deploy to multiple inputs and devices like we'll be talking about. Body tracking, haptics, sensory devices, audio, all of these things coordinated to react to guest decisions and interactions. Soon even 5G is going to enable the removal of cabling and a lot of the wiring that we're currently seeing for even more immersive environments. All of these things and components working together are what really elevates the emotional reactions and responses to guests to this technology.
Again, all really good points. So when you think about it, historically, rides have been focused around fear or dread, resulting from the roller coaster slowly getting to the top of the lift hill, ready for the gravity and the speed and the height. That's where the excitement from rides have come from. It seems like now, though, we're entering this sort of renaissance of what an attraction is. There's this shift. With these improvements in technology and the introduction of agency, we can now evoke a much broader range of emotional experiences, far beyond fear or dread. We can tap into things like wonder, the sense of exploration, the accomplishment, joy, even sadness. This much wider range of emotional experience options really expands our storytelling capabilities well beyond what we've had before as an industry. And those new experiences can lead to really incredible and really emotional interactions with our guests.
Yeah, very much. I mean, the industry was built on fear and terror to some degree, so there's nothing wrong with that. People love it. It's why the attractions industry is as big as it is, and why there's such a wide range of amazing roller coasters and death-defying machines. There's nothing wrong with that at all. People are looking for something new, of course, in a lot of areas. And what we can do with game engines and the kind of experiences we can build is we can actually bring the world closer to you, make it a more intimate experience. And once you get closer, more intimate, virtual reality is the best example of this, of course. You can have a more direct one-to-one connection with characters. Using the game engines, we can have an actual reactionary dialogue perhaps with those characters, have them guide you, how you make a decision and make a choice that then guides the storyline, and how we introduce various elements to that storyline and to the experience to tug at you in different ways is completely different than just dropping off of a cliff and firing down at 1,000 miles an hour. So we can make things much more interesting and, like we've been talking about, a far greater emotional attachment to the experience with these new technologies that we're introducing.
Awesome. So now that we've drilled down one level from interactive attractions to agency, we're beginning to build the roadmap towards interactive attractions. However, agency alone isn't enough. Just because somebody has the ability to act doesn't mean that the story automatically becomes interactive. Just because we give guests the steering wheel doesn't mean that all of a sudden it's interactive. The story needs to react in a meaningful way. That's all built around this belief of cause and effect. Cause and effect is the next step in our pathway to emotional interactive experiences. Guests are driving the story and the story is reacting in a real and meaningful way. The experience, the attraction is reacting in a real and meaningful way. There needs to be this real and meaningful cause and effect relationship that likely goes beyond getting a high score or even activating an animatronic. And that all these reactions need to be aligned with the overall story. According to research, at about the age of 8 months, human beings begin to develop this notion of causality, this notion that you as an individual have the ability to incite or influence a reaction. This is then deeply ingrained in each of us and serves as the core of our reasoning for the rest of our lives. We make decisions, we explore our world, and we steer ourselves towards safety, all built upon this cause and effect relationship, this cause and effect wiring that has been continually building our entire lives. So learning how to exploit this cause and effect wiring gets us one step closer to creating the ultimate interactive emotional experience. To explore that cause and effect relationship further, I think first we need to think about how do we as humans connect with our physical world organically. Each of us uses whatever senses we have available, whether it's a sense of touch or sense of sight, to explore the world around us. Typically, we use whatever the most combination of senses we have available to incite the most powerful interaction with our environment. Therefore, in our attractions, we need to give guests the tools and the ability to use as many senses as they can to interact with our stories and mimic as close as we can those organic, intuitive interactions that we have on a minute-by-minute basis with our world every day. On the effect side, we need to give guests reactions that also mimic the real-world reactions we receive from the physical environment. For example, when you touch a flower, there's a sensory touch, there's a smell, there's a sight, there's a lot of engagements that happen. And so just like the real world on our experiences and in our attractions, we need to touch as many senses as possible and give guests a multi-sensory reaction. In our attractions, that means exploring how do we improve the devices that we currently are using that take guest inputs and commands. We've had a lot of challenges in this area because, first of all, many attractions rely on a shooting mechanism, but not all stories have a shooting mechanism. Things like guest crossover, where did I shoot that target or did my friend shoot that target? not knowing how to even use the interaction device. You spend half of the ride figuring out how to use it instead of focusing on the ride and the story itself. And now in light of COVID, thinking through how do we eliminate those touch points and the ability to limit the contamination. So first, let's start with the shooting problem. A lot of our stories don't involve a shooting mechanism, so giving guests a gun doesn't make sense. So Terry, can you talk a little bit about the progression away from the shooting mechanism into something that's more in line with the stories that we're trying to tell?
Sure, yeah, of course, you're right. What we can do, a good example actually is right here. We've got Midnight Ride. This is a full-size motorcycle. It's got controls. You can steer this thing. It's got throttle control. You can actually affect the acceleration and deceleration of the device. That's light years beyond taking a little laser pointer and blasting that around inside of an experience and calling that interactive, of course. This interactivity relates directly to the experience and affects the experience itself as well. So that's a much higher elevation in terms of the sense of immersion, the sense of interactivity than you're ever going to get with as you noted, am I the correct dot? Is that actually me that did the interaction or not? So we're getting into areas that are light years beyond what we kind of thought of as interactivity previously. And oftentimes, these things will just get dropped onto anything, even if it's related to the context of the ride or not, and just to call it interactivity, right? So we're getting much more contextual, much more attached to the actual experience itself through the input controls that we're able to deploy.
Exactly. And oftentimes there's also that problem of guest crossover, and even more problematic, guests aren't really familiar with the devices that we're giving them. Can you talk a little bit through how things are becoming more intuitive, or even relying on the devices that we have in our pockets, like our own cell phones, to achieve a new intuitive kind of interactivity?
Sure, yeah. What we'll see is guests, typically a ride system will give you about a 4 to 5 minute experience. And what's going to happen is if the control scheme or the control mechanism is anything more complicated than something that's very intuitive to them already, and they miss the instruction on how to use that control scheme or mechanism, that can lead for not a great experience. You've either not understood how to use the buttons or the controls or the things that you're expected to do. You don't understand what's happening out in the ride system itself. And pretty soon you fall behind, or you just didn't get the full impact of what the ride was intended to deliver. So keeping things as simple as possible, as intuitive as possible, so control mechanisms and control inputs that people are already familiar with it, as soon as they look at it, they understand it. As many of those type of control inputs we can build into systems, the better. The more we can relate the narrative and the context of the ride to those type of systems, the better. So really it comes down to intuitiveness and human nature, and as you're saying, what we've already kind of got embedded in us and understanding that we currently have on how things work.
Right, exactly. Finally, COVID-19 has caused all of us to rethink how we do everything in our daily lives. On our attractions, we've thought about how do we eliminate or at least control the touch points to reduce contamination. That's taken center stage as we develop new attractions. So Terry, I'm wondering, can you talk us through some new opportunities that's created for us in terms of interactivity?
Sure, yeah, that's a big concern, of course, for operators and guests in terms of how do you keep equipment clean, how do you keep touch points to a minimum. As interactive ride designers, we can talk to the clients about, what's the minimum interface required and the smallest amount of touch points required. With virtual reality, we have a solution ourselves in terms of head-worn gear. This is our DreamSet headset. So these are hygienically cleaned between each use. Every rider gets one of these in the pre-show, and you simply click into the VR, you get your experience. These come off again, very simple and easy to use. Keeps the hygiene of the head space very clean. We also are looking at projection mapping now, of course, as an interactive ride solution where the guests are largely interacting through touchless interfaces, so affecting the outcomes of ride systems through gesture, through body tracking, and using natural gestures and motions to determine outcomes is another great way to keep touch points to a minimum and avoid these kind of situations where hygiene is a big concern.
Right. So with all of these challenges, every day we see new input devices that are coming online into our market that allows us to solve a lot of these problems. We're no longer reliant on lasers and photo eyes to get an interactive ride experience, and we're no longer reliant on guns and shooting mechanisms. By cleverly deploying these new input devices, the gamification of our ride systems is entering a new era. Terry, I'm wondering, can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure, yeah, of course. Like you're saying, a lot of input devices are moving away from actual handhelds, things like pointers or things like button-mounted on vehicles to natural gesture controls. We can track motion, we can understand what the guests are doing. So imagine as an example, you're in an experience and we give you the ability to close your fist to do a power-up and then open your fist to release. And that simple gesture of this is what gives you the ability to shoot at a dragon or cast a magic spell out into the experience and then have the experience react to that, much like you would in a real live video game that you play in your living room. Now we're introducing into this much broader, much cooler space of an interactive ride system. So that's a simple example of some of the systems that we can deploy now to introduce interactivity like we would in a video game to just make the whole thing much more closer and intimate to you.
Right, and what I think is most exciting about these new interactivity devices is that they're really intuitive, familiar, but also unique in the way that we're applying them into our attractions. They're also engaging more than one sense. These multi-sensory input devices are going to continue to redefine interactivity.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, another good example, actually, if we can go back to Midnight Ride over my shoulder here, this system was designed to be a one-to-one representation of the virtual reality vehicle you're riding on. So with this ride system, we're providing the physicality of seeing yourself embodied in the experience. You reach out and you touch the CG representation of the motorcycle in CG, but you're experiencing the same physical sensation of touching it because it's a one-to-one with that actual physical device. So what you're riding on and what you're controlling are the same thing. Through motion tracking and additional haptic devices on the machine itself and the steering mechanisms and seat rumblers, for example, to indicate engine noise. We're combining all these systems to create both an input device and a feedback mechanism back to the guest. So it becomes sort of this one cohesive whole as opposed to just a simple input device that has maybe a single reaction. The whole thing is a complete unit, and it works for a much greater, deeper guest immersion, much more interactive and much more emotional connection. Once again, keep coming back to that than your typical passive, linear, just watch things go by type of experience.
Let's now take those ideas and put them into the real world. Terry, can you walk us through the technology and devices that are contributing most and giving that next level of interactivity in our attractions?
Oh, a lot, yeah. So using technology now, what we can do is really, understand a couple different things about somebody. We can understand you in terms of your composition, your size, your shape, what you're doing gesture-wise, using, simple devices such as, tracking, localized tracking for hand gestures and various technologies and cameras to do that. Much bigger, broader gestures and body tracking itself, whole body tracking. Using these kind of technologies, even without an input device at all, and you not touching anything at all, we can understand what you're doing and what your intent is. Using some simple RFID type technologies, wearables, small scale wearables, maybe that have embedded information about the guest through guest membership or through information that they're willing to share anyway. We can understand, as they come into the experience, who they are, how big they are, what size they are, any information that they would like to present to us. And then we can tailor that experience to them using that information. So it can be a much, much more intimate, much more personal experience that's tied one-to-one with the guest. Using things like audio even, using speech AI, understanding what people are saying during the experience and being able to real-time react to that as well. There's a number of things that involve touchless technologies to enable really close, intimate guest tracking and understanding of intent and the ability to tailor and customize what's happening in the experience at any given moment to that guest.
Yeah, really awesome stuff. And aren't there other hardware improvements coming along as well? What are we seeing in terms of new controller developments?
Sure, yeah. I mean, we've been talking about a lot of stuff already. Actually, a good example might be hardware that's actually available to the guest to purchase, for example. So imagine, because we are body tracking you in a lot of cases, imagine that you can see yourself in the experience, but if there's something that you bought or something that you prearranged through a kiosk to have as part of your experience, we can have that show up in the experience itself. And we're talking about virtual reality, of course. So imagine that you've got a device that you've purchased and you can now see it physically in your presence and in your grasp in the virtual reality experience, and be able to deploy that to do whatever it was designed to do. So this is a case of hardware that's actually, the sky's the limit, really. Whatever can be designed as part of the experience, as a pre-sale, brought into the experience, be part of the experience, and then the guest takes it away with them, of course, afterwards, because they've made the purchase of it.
Right. So those are just a few ideas and some new ways that input devices are allowing for new and unique ways for our guests to cause actions to happen. So on the other side is the effect. Once guests give those commands through the new input devices we just talked about, how then do we resolve those? How do we respond? How do our systems react? Again, just like the input devices, output devices have had their fair share of challenges. Traditionally, rides and attractions have all been centered around stunning and immersive visuals while leaving out some of the other senses. Terry, can you talk a little bit about that, about how we want to invoke a more holistic sensory response?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're all familiar with some ride systems that will deploy smells, for example, on occasion. But typically with most group ride systems, large-scale ride systems, everybody's getting the same thing at the same time. It's the same sensations for everybody. The holy grail is really how do we engage as many senses as possible, but as localized to each individual guest as possible, so that it's their experience that they're receiving the input from, rather than just part of a group experience. And then there's ways now for us to be able to start drill down into those localized moments and those very specific moments per guest in order to deliver some really cool experiences.
Right. And another problem with the output devices is that they typically cause global effects that affect either everybody or no one. Everybody gets the same visuals, everybody gets the same scent, everybody gets the same wind. And while sometimes this makes really good sense, oftentimes a more targeted approach would make even more sense and be even more compelling. Can you talk a little bit, Terry, about these more targeted approaches?
Yeah, and that's by necessity, of course. The large-scale flying theater, for example, it's a very large room. Everybody's very tightly put together, all facing the same direction. And it's very difficult, just from a logistics point of view, being able to localize experiences to those guests. It's largely a group experience and a lot of fun as well. I mean, we're not trying to knock those experiences. They're amazing. It's just a question of what are those new kinds of experiences that we can build, and how much can we drill down to make that individualized to each individual guest.
So with those challenges, what are some of the new solutions we're seeing? We are seeing the emergence of new technologies that allow for a more individualized and all-encompassing multi-sensory response. Terry, do you mind talking a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. So a couple of things that we're seeing coming into the market now that'll be deployed or can be deployed shortly, if not now, is in this case of olfactory sensations, smells and things that can be deployed to headsets that can be localized right down to the guest. It doesn't have to be room scale where everybody's getting the same thing at the same time. We can make it local to the guest, and have a range of smells and olfactory sensations to give to the guest. And that's one of the biggest emotional reactions to inputs to humans, for humans, is the sense of smell. We know that through science, and most people personally, they understand that you smell something and it just immediately takes you somewhere. So that's starting to come on to the scene where we can start playing around with using that kind of technology. Of course, robotics and actuators, things that can be particularly in vehicle simulations, where we can give a sensation of road noise or track noise or haptics of engines, or things that are directly related to the mechanics of the vehicle that you're controlling. Nice small scale robotics and actuators to indicate that. Binaural audio, that's not necessarily a headset either. We can make these room scale where you get the sensation that there's a 3D soundscape around you, even without having to wear headphones. There's some cool technology that we have deployed and is on the market now for doing that type of thing as well. So there's something new every day. You go to a place like CES every year and you just turn over rocks and find amazing things that potentially could be introduced into rides and attractions as just another layer of the onion to add into the sense of realism and that sense of emotional attachment.
Really exciting stuff. And even more, there's now devices that are removing the need to touch things or gear up, but still deliver haptic experiences. Terry, I'm wondering, can you talk to us a little bit about that new technology?
Yeah, for sure. There's actually a really interesting technology that Ultraleap has come out with using sort of sonic audio waves to create the sensation of a physical object in space without there being anything there. So you can you'd reach out your hand and you would feel something as if it's there in space. So imagine, just by way of example, if you had that actually inverted and pointed down and you're holding your hand out, as we were talking before about the example of the shooting of the effect. Imagine that you're holding your hand out underneath an orb and you're kind of getting this sensation in your hand of having this magic orb, and you remove that and then you toss that orb. So you're getting this sensation and feeling like there's something in your hand. You're getting this awesome effect of deploying that effect out of your hand, interacting with the experience. There's a whole bunch of possibilities as this technology gets developed farther in terms of, again, touchless. You don't have to keep it clean because it's sort of out in space. And kind of cool creative possibilities that this kind of technology is going to start to be seeing scattered throughout attractions hopefully very soon.
Right, so those are just a few of the actual practical devices that are being used. Terry, can you touch on the highlights from each of the categories, starting with scent and moving on?
On the smell front, yeah, there's a couple of companies out there right now that are working on this. Vaxo in Japan, Feel Real. They have, for example, hardware attachments that can go right onto a virtual reality headset and deliver these olfactory sensations to a system. And in some cases, we need to look at how ruggedized they can be. How much volume of the actual aromatics can be deployed over the course of a day. But the technology exists, and it's the creative possibilities can be played with right now in terms of how we could use them. So imagine, for example, you're in a street scene or a street chase. You're going past a bakery. You get the chocolate chip cookie sensation. A car peels out. You get that waft of burning rubber. Introducing these kind of sensations and these sensations into an attraction is just going to elevate it so much, and particularly since, again, if we've given you agency, it's when if you go by the bakery, not just that it's always there. You happen to take that path, or you happen to be in that path of the experience that you took that has a car chase scene with the burning rubber. So it's localized to you within that virtual reality experience. These technologies exist. It's just a matter of getting them well integrated with the ride systems and able to handle that high throughput requirement.
Cool. What about touch and audio?
Yeah, we've touched on a few of these already. Ultraleap, for example, with their sonic sensation that they can build into their cool new devices. Ultraleap also has very good touchless tracking as well. Yara 3D, Calm Hero is a name that it used to be. We've actually got one on Midnight Ride once again, bringing that into it. So that delivers a singular speaker out in front of the guest, but it delivers a 3D soundscape around them. Those are a couple of the companies involved with really cool, interesting technologies that in some cases we've already deployed, and in other cases we're looking for use cases for, and exciting stuff.
Awesome. And finally, visuals have always been a staple of our industry, but can you talk a little bit about how even advances are being made by AV companies that are allowing never before seen visual experiences?
Yeah, probably the most obvious example of an individualized AV system would be virtual reality. Of course, everybody's in their own bespoke experience that's only local to them. There's other technology out there actually that doesn't involve VR. Christie has Christie View, for example, which has a screen that can be split up through the use of special glasses into 4 separate channels, essentially. And each guest, even though there's 4 people sitting side by side, are seeing something different on that screen. So you can imagine, actually, if we take something like, let's imagine you have the Christie glasses built into a headset of some sort, that has an olfactory device on it. Imagine that you're all in a room and there's some input device that allows each guest to kind of work around the room or the environment. And as you go past certain things, you're getting an individualized smell or sensation to you. Again, maybe it's the bakery example, chocolate chip cookies here, fresh bread there. Somebody, through the input device goes outside and it's a fresh pine smell because there was recently a rainstorm in the Pacific Northwest environment that you happen to be in. And then everybody's sitting side by side, but they all have this different experience looking in the same direction using the same devices essentially.
Terry, that's awesome. So now, as we progress towards emotional, interactive experiences, we started with agency. We drilled down a little bit deeper as we just talked and introduced to cause and effect to get us one step closer towards the ultimate goal of creating the strongest, deepest, most emotional connections in our attractions. Next, and as a last step, let's take one more step closer to emotional connection, which we believe is accomplished by introducing some level of personalization and personal connection with our guests to our attractions. The last step on the path to redefining interactivity is including personal information into the attraction. Even before we learn cause and effect as humans, we learn our name. Research suggests that in as little as 5 months, we learn that our name refers to us. We are trained then from almost the beginning of our existence to react and respond to our name. We focus our attention, we listen more intently, and are more engaged when we're called by name. Therefore, just like Martin Howell says here in his quote, we truly believe that the last step to redefining interactive experiences and achieving that ultimate goal of emotional experiences is to integrate the person into the attraction. And maybe put another way, it really truly matters that I, Mark, or you, Terry, are riding the attraction. And depending on my personal information and my interest, that experience is different, it's unique, it's specifically meaningful to me. Just like the challenges that we discussed before on agency and on cause and effect, creating meaningful personal connections also has its challenges. Terry, there aren't many, if at all, ride systems that currently exist that take a lot of personalization into account. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, traditionally everybody's, they're basically on the same ride, and the system makes no effort really to customize the content or the experience to the individual guests themselves. Your ride is the same as anybody else's, with maybe some exceptions. If you're at the front of a roller coaster, the back of a roller coaster, you have a different experience versus if you're in the middle, and some people really like that. But for the most part, pretty much all rides, even dark rides and other media-based rides, they're pretty much the same experience for everybody from start to end without any variations, which is fine. People sit together and they watch a movie, and it's all the same for everybody, and it's a lot of enjoyment out of that. There's nothing wrong with those, of course. It's, how do you take it to the next level? What's the next iteration of that kind of experience?
Right. And obviously, you can't expect a steel ride like a roller coaster to have huge amounts of personalization. And even on traditional dark rides that have pre-recorded or pre-rendered media, the personalization is difficult to produce. And so it is true that on these older attractions, it was really difficult, almost impossible to introduce any kind of real personalization in a cost-effective way.
Yeah, as soon as one of these last generation kind of systems goes online, it's pretty much locked in forever. It's not a bad thing necessarily. A lot of iconic rides are iconic because they are repeatable and people get enjoyment out of it every single time, even when they know what's coming. So the opportunity, though, to make a more meaningful and personalized connection with guests is entirely possible with new systems and new technologies.
As with the other areas, we are constantly entering new frontiers when it comes to technology that enables personalization. For starters, one area that we're just beginning to see used on our attractions is incorporating sensors and other devices within the ride or around the attraction to understand who is sitting in that seat and who is in that environment, using things like geomapping and RFID sensors, and using that data to make the experience a little more personal and a little more unique.
Yeah, exactly. Particularly with virtual reality, where everybody's headset is individualized to them, so they get the experience, and as we were talking about, the agency within the experience itself. But as another layer on top of that, imagine using this RFID technology, or even if a membership scan of a card is part of the entrance to the attraction, we can possibly present a version of the ride that is unique or personalized to each guest. So at a minimum, we might know your name if you're willing to allow us to know that. We can possibly insert that into text or part of the the intro sequence to a ride system or at the start of the ride, or even have a character. Imagine a character that can address you by name. They know your name and they can speak directly to you in the experience. Maybe we know if you're a member and that you bought a particular item or you stayed at a particular hotel. We can introduce something about your experience that you're having inside the park and bring it into the ride system itself. If you've bought some certain items, can we introduce that into the ride system so that if you're embodied, for example, you have that item with you. Maybe we bought it in the gift shop, again, a great chance for pre-tail. So changing the avatars, updating items, give unique power-ups even. All this stuff, as much as guests will allow us to know about them, we'll find ways to design that into the system and reflect that information back to them, just kind of giving you, again, this overall much more comprehensive emotional attachment to the experience that you're having.
That's an awesome first step and will undoubtedly lead to more personalized, more engaging experiences. However, one area that we're all hearing about emerging right now is 5G. Typically, we see it in the term of cell application, 5G technology coming to these cities. But 5G can also offer other benefits. 5G has a unique ability to allow for much quicker reaction times, almost zero latency to power more dynamic experiences. The sheer amount of data that can be transferred in seconds can be distributed to our ride systems, really allowing for much more personalized interactions beyond simply knowing your name or knowing where you're sitting. For example, the music you were just listening to, the things that interest you, the travel photos from your trip to Utah last year, all of those things can be incorporated into a ride experience, making for something extremely personal and extremely emotional that weaves itself into the overall story arc. Can you imagine that?
Yeah, absolutely. Beyond the benefit of just being able to remove a lot of the cabling and the wiring, et cetera, that typically will come with headset experiences, we're going to be able to keep track of guests to a very high level of detail with their movement and their orientation, and then combine that with data that we might know about the guests and update and change content based on their individual or even group actions and reactions. So imagine a projection map room, that's aware of exactly where each guest is within it, and possibly even, the groupings within it, where they're looking, what they're currently doing, what are the family groups, et cetera, and then the creative possibilities that can come about when you're able to address, guide, and kind of lead those guests either individually or as units through an experience. So using technology, emerging technology like 5G, pretty soon we're going to be able to create these far more personalized and connected experiences.
So now, zooming back out, we can track our steps as we redefine interactivity. Starting with the predefined idea of interactive attractions as shooting dark rides, we've made the case for introducing agency, along with presenting some challenges and solutions that we've encountered there. Then we took it a level deeper. We talked about what to do with that agency and how agency has to be accompanied by meaningful cause and effect to further draw guests into the story. Both input and output devices have had their share of challenges, but again, technology is allowing for new opportunities there. Finally, we drilled one more level deeper, adding in personalization. This layer really completes the journey towards an emotional attraction because it pulls guests, and not just any guest, you, into the story. Just like many other industries, like retail, where knowing the person, knowing the consumer has really disrupted and really changed the game, our ability to integrate agency and integrate cause and effect relationships and integrate personal connections into our attractions will really change the game for what it means to be an interactive and immersive experience. This perfectly aligns with the formal definition of emotion. Through the roadmap we just explored, agency, cause and effect, personalization, that really enables an emotional response because it allows guests to change their circumstance, interact meaningfully with their environment, and interact with others in ways that go far beyond what is experienced now. We want to leave you with this. As our industry moves through this really tough time, redefining interactivity will only become more important. The stories we tell and the experiences that we give to our guests will need to be more compelling, more engaging, and more unique. And the thoughtful implementation of the roadmap strategies that we presented today is one avenue, not the only avenue, but for sure one avenue to create these more compelling and engaging experiences. As shown here from the TEA report this year, based on the SARS epidemic of 2003, there is the expectation that a significant demand for in-person, social, interactive experiences will exist once the pandemic declines. Therefore, now is the time for us to explore, to redefine, and to produce the next level of incredible, next level unique, and next level redefined interactive attractions. If you take one thing from this discussion, we hope that you're now rethinking the definition of interactive attractions, and you use the roadmap, the agency, cause and effect, and personalization as your guide in designing and developing that next story that's waiting to be told. When the world returns to our parks, to our attractions, to our experiences, and to our events, we can connect with guests like never before in exciting and in emotional ways that creates connections. Like I said at the beginning, both Terry and I spend every day working and pushing the boundaries of interactive experiences. If you want to connect with us further, talk more about the technologies we presented, or discuss with us some other tools and other new things we're exploring, please connect with us. Reach out to the emails shown here. We would love to chat more. Thank you all so much for your attention. Please stay safe, and we look forward to connecting with you all soon. See ya.
Thanks, Mark. Bye, everybody. Hope to see everybody again in person soon.